And welcome to another installment of RBF's Real Bengals Fans podcast with your hosts Scott Meyer and Sammy Stickler. This is the Real Bengals Fans podcast, and we will be discussing several different topics today on our show. Just to give you kind of a brief background on RBF and Real Bengals Fans, what we are, we do have a Facebook group with 10,000 members strong of Bengals fans, and we talk all about the Bengals on that Facebook group. If you decide to join, don't hesitate. Simply look us up on groups on Facebook under RBF or Real Bengals Fans, and go ahead and join up and join in the fun. In addition, we also have our Real Bengals Fans Facebook page at Real B Fans, facebook.com Real B Fans. In addition to that, and that channel is actually used to broadcast our articles, our Bengals articles, from our website, realbengalsfans.com. Again, that's realbengalsfans.com. Sammy, who is the co-host, is one of the authors on that website and shares a lot of really great, insightful articles there backed by statistics and fact. Sammy, if you don't mind, maybe let me know how you're doing. I know we haven't talked in about a week, and in addition, any new articles that you've just published or currently working on that you want to share with us today.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty great, Scott. I appreciate you having me back on. I mean, I know we're going to be doing this. We're going to, I know, hopefully try to do this once a week. But with that being said, my most recent article that I worked on is based off of the coaching changes that's happened over the past week or two with the Bengals. With the last loss that we took, that I know we're going to be talking about today, because I know nobody really has had that chance to vent except through the RBF webpage, that we all thought that Marvin Lewis was going to be gone because of the inability to win in the playoffs. With that being said, even though he didn't lose his job, I was really anxious to see what kind of coaching changes were going to be taking place. So that was what my most recent article was about, is it's just a brief overview of the coaching changes. And one of the more optimistic changes that I'm very optimistic about, in fact, is whenever he decided to bring back Kevin Coyle as the defensive back coach. And if you want to know why I'm excited about that hire, go on to the realbengalsfans.com and look for it, and you'll understand why.
And Sammy, what was the name of that article again for everybody so they can find that on realbengalsfans.com?
The name of that article is Rebuild, Reload, and Repeat.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And so we, as you mentioned, we are going to be talking about the Steelers-Bengals wild card playoff game. We had discussed it briefly on our other show, and we started to get into the details about that, but we decided, I guess, that it just made sense that we go ahead and do a whole show about that specific game, just because of how gut-wrenching it actually was, and maybe talk more in depth about the different topics that surround that game. Now, just to start off for everybody, Sammy, what were your expectations leading up to the game when we were going to play the Steelers in that that wild card playoff game?
Yeah. Leading up to that game, the expectation for me was there was absolutely no way that I felt like we were going to lose. That game was at home. It was in prime time. Yeah, I understand that our prime time record wasn't that great, and it hasn't been since Andy Dalton's been at the helm. But as I've written before, we were near that hump. I mean, in our primetime games this year, we lost by 4 points to Houston. We lost by 3 points to Arizona. We lost by 3 points to Denver. We were there. We were just a field goal away by average away from getting over that hump. And so the only matchup, that I felt that the Steelers had a bigger advantage over the Bengals was at quarterback, because they had their, all-pro Ben Roethlisberger versus our backup A.J. McCarron. Everything else on that field, the Bengals were the better team. And so my expectation going into that was there was absolutely no way that we were going to lose it, but unfortunately, we all know what happened.
Yeah, I had no thought whatsoever that we were going to lose that game going into it. As I mentioned on the last show, it was my birthday, that wild card playoff game. I thought for sure I was going to get that gift. But unfortunately, it didn't play out that way. I do think, as far as my expectations were concerned, I was worried about the fact that we had a backup quarterback going into that game. I know it's A.J. McCarron. I know that he had some decent stats in the games that he did play for us during the regular season. However, being in a playoff game is a lot different than a regular season game, and I had thought that I would have been more comfortable having Dalton at the helm. Obviously, with the broken thumb, that's not going to happen. We had to rely on AJ. He wasn't quite, Dalton wasn't quite over the hump with his thumb at all, so he had to step in still. AJ did. The thing that I was really expecting to see, though, is a complete stop of their run game. I was expecting Hill to have his, breakout second season, amazing playoff just beat down. And unfortunately, it turned up quite the opposite. So my expectations running into that game were that our run game was going to be amazing and strong compared to the Steelers. So that was kind of a letdown for me to see, especially with the fact that, now Hill is known as having a fumbling problem. But as far as, the matchup is concerned, I thought that our defense was stout. I wasn't necessarily concerned about Roethlisberger, to be quite honest, other than the final couple minutes of the game. A.J. McCarron, he missed like 5 wide open throws. So that was kind of disheartening. But, they really weren't playing that well in the first half. And then they came out in the second half and started to come back in the middle of the rain against their biggest rival. And looked like we were going to really have a good run at it. So what were your worries that you had going into that game? Did you have any concerns that stuck out in your mind, Sammy?
Yeah, I'd have to say that the main worry that I had going into the game was my hope was that the Bengals weren't going to try to play Pittsburgh Steelers football, which is exactly what ended up happening in the last 8-9 minutes of the game. And what I mean by that is that Pittsburgh is known. They're going to try to bait you. They're going to try to do anything, chip at you. They're going to do that extra hit whenever the officials aren't looking to try to aggravate and to bring the frustration out on Cincinnati. And unfortunately, that is exactly what ended up happening. The baiting and that went on with that was absolutely uncalled for because it's not professional football. It's, and it can be called an excuse. You can say that, I'm just making an excuse all you want to. I don't really care. But the fact is that was the worry that I had. Are they going to try to bait us, and are we going to fall for it? Unfortunately, we have those hotheads on our defense, Montez Burfict, Adam Jones, that fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and we all know what happened.
That's the thing that really blows my mind about that, too, is they talked all about being prepared for that to be what was going to happen. Everybody knows that the Steelers play dirty. It's so much so that it's become the norm, and I think that a lot of times, even when the Steelers are playing dirty, the refs don't even bother to call it because it's just considered the norm now for the Steelers to do that kind of thing. Baiting and stuff like that, yes, that there could be a conversation about possibly having some sort of penalties involved in baiting, but typically that stuff happens, like you said, when the refs aren't looking. So the biggest question then comes to mind for me is, how many years do you have to be in this league before you start to have a maturity level that allows you to get past that baiting, that allows you to not give into it and turn your passion towards playing really hard into something that just basically works against you? And that's my biggest concern. I think that it says a lot about a head coach when they can't keep their players focused on what the prize is at the end. The fact that, Adam Jones, for instance, has been with our organization, has been with the Bengals for, several years. And Marvin has, quite frankly, too. The fact that that hasn't been something that has been bridged between those two as a coach-player relationship goes, and there being an understanding not to lose your mind in the last 2 minutes, especially of a game, that's pretty important stuff. And I think a lot of that falls on the shoulders of Marvin just as much as it does Adam Jones. Unfortunately, though, with Adam Jones comes, that double-edged sword. That guy's passion is what really drives his success as an NFL football star. That guy has talent. And with that talent comes that passion, and it unfortunately gets out of control sometimes. Same thing with Vontez. But, hey, that's the thing that you have to understand. We asked for that defense to finally come around here in Cincinnati. We've been dying to have, that type of defensive, power. And now we do, and the repercussions are such that, it is that double-edged sword. So we just kind of have to deal with it. I mean, what are your thoughts on what we should do in order to try to get that maturity level up with those two players specifically? Do you think there's anything that we could do to try to make that a better situation?
Well, Scott, whenever Marvin Lewis brings in Jim Haslett, who was a head coach, to be the linebacker coach, I know that the man had success as a head coach, and I'm hoping that maybe he's going to be able to channel that energy from Vontez a little bit better, just to keep his play on the field. I've got, a statement I'm going to say probably a little bit later that I'm going to bring into it. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and bring it up now. I'm kind of hoping that come next year, that with this new coaching staff change, that they have a new philosophy of put up and shut up. And what I mean, and I'm not talking about that old put up or shut up. I'm talking about put up and shut up. Put your play on the field and stop with all the theatrics. Shut up. Let the game go. If you're getting, chipped by the Steelers or whoever, then so be it. Because unfortunately, Vontez is now tagged as a dirty player. He's going to have to live with that tag. He's not going to be able to erase it, I don't believe, because we all have seen what type of player. Yes, he has intensity, but unfortunately, he's become the Ndamukong Suh of linebackers. We all know that Ndamukong Suh has been tagged as a dirty defensive line player. He'll step on you, do whatever, go for the low hit. And, well, unfortunately, guess what? We've got that player and playing, in our linebacker position. So I don't know how he's going to be able to remove that tag, because he, does the head-to-head hits, and he, hits the players as they're going out of bounds. And hopefully this new coaching staff will be able to do something about it.
Yeah, I do hope that that's the case, man. I'd like to see that professional level, that veteran come out in him. Not just Vontez, because Vontez is fairly young still, but especially Adam Jones. I'd like to see him take on a different persona as far as what he's going to allow get to him to where he ends up costing, us yards, quite frankly. Now, yeah, that was one of the obvious issues, having those, I guess, attitudes flare up and, them giving in to the baiting. But there are a lot more outstanding issues that we're going to get into here shortly as well. But before we do, one of the things that I wanted to talk about moving into the offseason was A.J. McCarron's backup play and, how well he did for us towards the end of the season after the unfortunate injury to Dalton. Now, did you expect him to, stay with the Bengals or be traded? I mean, what were you thinking as far as his overall play and whether or not that's going to allow him to end up on a different team, or do you think that they're going to try to keep him around? What's your thoughts on that, Sammy?
Really, whenever it comes down to it, Scott, I think that AJ, if he's going to go somewhere, there's only one place I can honestly see him ending up, and that's going to be possibly up in Cleveland with Hugh Jackson. The reason I feel that way is right now we all know that the Cleveland Browns do not have a franchise quarterback. Johnny Manziel is Johnny Manziel, who knows where he's going to end up, if he even ends up anywhere at all next season. But, I do feel that Hugh Jackson's going to want to bring somebody in that, knows his system. And because he did, run the last 6 games of the season for the Bengals, he's going to have the familiarity with his offense. The only bad part about that for A.J. McCarron is if that scenario does play out. We all know that Cleveland is where quarterbacks go for their careers to die.
That's the truth, Sammy. I think it was something like 20-something different quarterbacks in the past, 10, 15 years for them, Cleveland Browns. Anyway, you make a really good point. I do believe that Johnny Manziel's career is over in Cleveland, especially now that Hugh has taken the helm. I don't think Hugh's going to have anything to do with that character. I think that, quite frankly, Cleveland was waiting for him to grow up and become the consummate professional that they thought that he might become and play like he did in college, but that never came to fruition. So obviously he's out the door. Obviously, the Cleveland Browns do need to have a better offensive line for any quarterback to come in. But I do think that if there is a team that A.J. McCarron is going to end up on, it's definitely going to be on the Cleveland Browns. And I think that Hugh Jackson is going to go as far as even offering up a second-round pick so that he can secure A.J. As his starting quarterback. Now, I know that his quarterback rating over the 4 games that he played was around 99. It wasn't, an amazing breakout performance over the 4 games that he was in, but he also didn't explode or implode either. He ended up carrying us to the victories that we needed when we needed them. Had the last 2 minutes of the Steelers-Bengals game gone differently and the tempers hadn't lost control, had Porter not been out on the field, we haven't even discussed that part. Had that stuff not happened, A.J. McCarron would have busted that 25-year drought of the playoff victory, and it would have been a different story. So you can't really place the blame for us losing the playoff game on A.J. McCarron's shoulders because he did what was necessary for us to win that game, quite frankly. But as far as A.J. McCarron goes, I think he's going to demand too much money. To remain a backup quarterback. I think that and Hugh's going to make a concerted effort to make sure he gets him on his roster. Now, let me ask you this: since we did kind of touch on Porter in that situation, do you think that the officials ever had control of the players and coaching staff? I mean, I certainly don't think that they did, but I mean, what's your take on that, Sammy?
Scott, ever since I think it was a few years ago, the NFL had to use replacement referees to help out while they were trying to work out the contracts, whatever that was. Ever since that time, these officials have been terrible in the NFL. It's not only the wild card game, as I mentioned before. It's all around. There's blown calls all over the place, and when it comes to the officials, as we've discussed before, the inconsistent rules and everything. It's ridiculous. If we're going to talk about, this game in particular, I brought it up before. The non-flag against Shazier, they don't throw it. They say, okay, he wasn't defenseless. But you know what? Shazier dropped the crown of his helmet. He hit Giovanni Bernard in the helmet, knocked him out of the game. And then, what did the NFL referees try to do? I mean, did they know that the fans were upset about it and probably looked up at the big screen and said, oh, my goodness, yeah, well, I'll probably missed it. So what do they do? Oh, we're going to make up for it. We're going to throw a holding penalty on the Steelers because, Mike Tomlin threw that challenge flag and got the fumble because Giovanni fumbled whenever he gets knocked out. Of course he's going to fumble the ball whenever it's a helmet-to-helmet contact. But the officials ever have control of the game? Absolutely not. I mean, they had the ability to give a sideline warning to say, hey, you need to get your players under control and keep them back. And none of this was ever done. The rules for me now in the NFL are pretty much non-existent. It's just, hey, we're going to do what we want when we want to do it as an official, and we're going to hope that it's the right call.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to mention was, with the refs and the fact that, they didn't really make any calls that were appropriate in my mind in the last 2 minutes. And the reason that I say that mainly is because had they taken in consideration Porter being on the field, the penalties that were caused as a result of that, and then that time frame would have ended up being offsetting. Then you have a different situation where the Steelers are actually still at the 50-yard line, out of field goal range in the rain, and the final seconds of the game, and still having to try to go down the field. I think that the call against Adam Jones was ridiculous, simply because the guy had his hair pulled. The fact is that they don't pay attention to that kind of thing. The fact that it wasn't put upstairs blows my mind. You can't let refs determine the outcome of a game, win or lose, in the last 2 minutes of any game. And if you're going to go down that road, they have to have some oversight in real time during the game from the officials upstairs. To get these calls wrong cost us a victory that we should have had, quite frankly, in my opinion. Now, before I get a little too upset about the refs, I'm going to move on to something else.
Hey, let me go one more really quick, Scott. Now, this is something I've thought about too, and I'm going to get your take on it as well. We all know and understand that this is a fast game. We've discussed that, in the last podcast. This is the fastest form of football that there is. And I do not understand why these referees feel that they can't throw a flag if it's not immediately noticed. Like when it comes to a coach's challenge, a coach is able to throw the red flag all the way up until the next ball is snapped. The officials upstairs can say, we need to take a look at that, scoring drive all the way up until the next play is snapped. Why is it that a referee has to make that choice immediately? Why can't he not think about, I did see that. Maybe I should go ahead and throw a flag, even if it's 10, 15 seconds after the play is over with. I mean, what's so wrong about that? I mean, what's your take?
Well, I think that it's absolutely insane that we have the technology of instant replay and we don't go by what actually happened in the instant replay as opposed to what the call is on the field, first off. Secondly, why wouldn't it be appropriate for the ref to go ahead and throw a flag a couple seconds later after the fact? I think, quite frankly, that the reason they don't do that is because they're afraid of having an aftermath because the crowd made so much noise, all of a sudden the ref played favorites, blah, blah, blah. I think that's something that they try to avoid simply because they don't want repercussions and they don't want it to seem like the refs are being stressed into making a call just because of how loud the crowd got. And once that rumor starts to surface and goes around the NFL, then all of a sudden everything's in question. So I think that the reason they don't do that has more to do with the fact that they're afraid of the repercussions. But what I would like to see happen is when they see the instant replay, the officials upstairs, and they see that there was a missed call, that they should instantly be on with the refs on the field and to tell them to throw a flag and then let everyone know the referees upstairs have decided to throw a flag based on the last play, and bang. They come out with what it was. They show the instant replay several times so everybody can see that it was indeed the case, and bang, it's done. Now, how is that going to stop up the game any more than it's already stopped up by the amazing amount of penalties that are called in every game now? The amount of penalties that have been called in NFL games have increased dramatically as well, year after year. So is it really going to slow the game up? Because I know that's going to be the biggest thing that people are going to argue against with that. Is it really going to slow things up? Do you want it to take an extra half an hour for your game to make sure that the refs aren't the ones making the wrong call with regard to your team or not? That's what I have to say to those folks.
But also, Scott, whenever you, and I know we alluded to this before, I would love to see, a coach's challenge be able to use on a penalty if they're not going to be able to do that. But with that being said, I don't think you can try to challenge every penalty, but I think that you should be able to say, we're going to make it where coaches can challenge, say, 2 penalties, a head-to-head helmet-to-helmet contact, and say a pass interference. You can't, challenge, hey, that was holding, because pretty much we all know that there's pretty much holding on every single play. No defensive holding. It's only like pass interference or, like I said, the helmet-to-helmet contact. If they're not going to allow these officials that extra time that they may need to think about the play that happened.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So why don't we switch gears a little bit and move away from the refs here and talk? We need to talk about what the most frustrating part of the game was for you specifically while you watched it all go down. Why don't you explain to our audience what that most frustrating part of the Steelers-Bengals game was for you specifically?
For me, Scott, it all boils down to the fact that Cincinnati's inability to control their emotions. I mean, I understand it's a heated game, it's rivalry, whatever you want, whatever excuse you want to make. The rules are there. Adam Jones knew that there's no reason that you should touch an official. I don't care if he was the high school football coach or Joey Porter or not. The rules are in place. Do not touch an official. Why does he put his hands on an official? Yeah, I know he's trying to show Joey Porter's on the field. He doesn't have to touch the official to say that to him. All he has to do is say, hey, Joey Porter's on the field, walk away. It's that over emotion that these players have. And yes, I was also frustrated with the Vontaze Burfict hit. I think that he ended up flopping Antonio Brown, maybe a little bit, but maybe he didn't because he went through the concussion protocol. Now, personally, in my opinion, because of the way that those players acted towards the end of the game, I hope when they went home at the end of the game, their mamas were waiting on their porch ready to smack the you-know-what out of them for acting like such an idiot, and costing us the game. So for me, yeah, that was the most frustrating point was, they can't control their emotions. And like I said before, I hope the new coaching staff is able to do something about it.
Yeah, I understand exactly where you're coming from on those specific topics. It's pretty ridiculous that they can't, at that level, try to gain their composure as a professional. For me, to answer that question, bottom line for me, I don't think the NFL. I think the NFL has zero idea what a catch is. Quite frankly, you want to speak about inconsistencies. Does anyone know what a catch is anymore? I mean, I watched that Martavius Bryant touchdown like 100 times, and while the catch was, quote unquote amazing, I still don't see how he actually had control with 2 feet down. To me, it was, much clearer that it really wasn't a catch than it actually was. And then we actually had the NFL VP of officiating come out to say that should not have been counted as a catch.
This seems to happen every year in the playoffs, though, Scott. I mean, you remember last year, what was it? It was the Packers versus Cowboys. It is like you say, they don't know what a catch is anymore. Unfortunately, I think wasn't it this year that Tyler Eifert had a touchdown pulled back because they said he didn't maintain control of the ball as he was getting tackled down, even though the ball broke the goal line. Because the last time I knew, when the ball breaks, he caught it, he placed the ball over the goal line, and he went down and the ball came out, so it was a incomplete pass. What is it now? I mean, it's almost scientific now to know if a ball is going to be considered catchable or not, because you can hear the officials whenever they're doing the instant replay and challenge flags phone, and one person will say, I think it's a catch, the other person says, I don't, and they bring on the expert that says, well, I think it is this, and then whenever they go out to the field, the referee on the field say, oh, it's not a catch. Nobody knows anymore.
That's true. It's completely inconsistent, and I don't think that the NFL knows what a catch is anymore. And I think that should be more concise. It shouldn't be a matter of somebody catching a ball on their butt and doing a flip and being out of bounds and somehow they got a touchdown. I think that's insane. One of the things that I was also going to touch on and that we discussed before the show was, what blame do you really place on the Bengals for the collapse in that game, the Steelers versus the Bengals in the wild card playoff game that we just, got to witness a couple weeks ago. I have to say that my biggest blame will go on not giving into the baiting. In addition, the coaching staff, and specifically Marvin Lewis, not having control of his players and being able to make sure that he grabs them by the collar and say, listen, you better chill the heck out, do what it takes to make sure you get these guys under control and to bring them back to reality and actually have built that rapport with that player to make sure that that's the case, especially in those types of situations. The other thing that frustrated me, and I know that we were talking about what frustrated us the most, but the thing that frustrated me the most on the field of play was mainly the no call when Bernard was hit. I understand, he wasn't considered a defenseless receiver because especially with running backs, they don't really consider them defenseless because they're coming out of the backfield. But when you use the crown of the helmet, it should be done, over with. Crown of the helmet to the other helmet. I mean, bang, automatic penalty. I don't care who it is. If it's the quarterback, running back, the linebacker hitting another, player on the offensive line, whatever the case may be, use your helmet, use the top of your helmet, bang, it's a penalty no matter what.
That hit cost us 3 points right there, Scott. I mean, we were already in field goal range. That's another 15 yards, 3 points, and what does that do for us? Wins us the game.
Bang, it's over with, right. So, what was your biggest frustrating moment of the game then, Sammy? I didn't ask you the question. I know I said I was going to, and I answered it myself. What was your biggest frustration overall?
Well, for me, the blame, it falls on the Bengals. People can say, referees were bad, and the NFL has part to blame because why would you put the same officiating crew that couldn't control them, a few weeks prior into the playoff game? That's ridiculous for them to do that. When, where's Ed Hockley? Where's, the other referees that the NFL should have known better than to put the same referee crew. So I'll put a little bit of the blame right there on the NFL. But for the most part, we only have ourselves to blame because, whenever Pittsburgh took over and we were on defense, we had every opportunity to stop them. But what were we doing? We had 3 linemen down and we were playing, prevent defense. Well, what is that going to do? That's going to allow them to do exactly what they needed to do, march down the field. And even before all that frustrating stuff started happening with the hit to Antonio Bryant from Fontes and the Adam Jones penalty, we had them 4th and 3, and we didn't put any pressure on Roethlisberger. So, in a way, I'm going to put some of this on Paul Gunther. Why in the world are we playing prevent defense whenever we've been able to all game long? We were stout. We were where we needed to be, and we put Roethlisberger down on his, time and time again. And the thing is for me, that kind of showed that he didn't trust his defense enough to hold them, that he felt like, well, that we're going to get beat even though we hadn't all game long. I absolutely agree 100%, man. It's very frustrating indeed. Changing gears a little bit, one thing I want to mention before we move forward on the show is the national media. And the media has this predetermined narrative when it comes to the Bengals, as far as the Bungles narrative. And it almost seems like they feed into it. There was dirty plays on our part, but there was just as many dirty plays on the Steelers' part, if not more. And it drives me absolutely insane that the national media doesn't recall all of the dirty players that wore the yellow and black uniform in the past, and all of the different dirty tactics that they've used throughout the history of that team. Just seemed like all of the media slanted everything towards the Bengals being at fault. I think the Bengals beat the Bengals ultimately in that game. It wasn't helped by the refs, and it wasn't helped by the dirty play of the Steelers, bottom line. But the national media overlooks that. Moving on, your take on the suspension with Burfict. Do you think that that's justified? Personally, I think the suspension is flat out ignorant. I mean, yeah, he hit his helmet, but going at the speed that he was, you can't let up on that. To me, Brown was, he had his head down whenever he got hit. I think, personally through the appeals process that I would expect his suspension to get reduced to one game. I mean, really, if you think about it, Tom Brady can get an entire suspension eradicated, over an AFC championship game for playing with deflated balls. Then why can't he get his reduced? Cheating is one thing, which I feel like was pretty much, I don't want to say justified. I can't think of the word I'm thinking of right now. Cheating is what Tom Brady and them did last year. They got him into the Super Bowl. One play hit, yes, Vontaze Burfict has been tagged that dirty player because, quite frankly, sometimes he can be. He can lay out dirty hits. We've seen it. But 3 games, whatever, I personally feel like it'll get taken down to 1.
Yeah, I do too. I think that it'll be 1 game suspension when it's all said and done. It's not, you can't compare it to anything like what Brady was up against, and it just doesn't make any sense to me, quite frankly. But anyway, as far as the final thoughts of the game itself, and I know we've run out of time, but what are your final thoughts of the Steelers-Bengals game, the wild card playoff game that we witnessed? I mean, what's your takeaway from it and moving into the offseason and into next season? What do you think, Sammy?
My final thought on the game was, for 3 quarters, the game wasn't that. I mean, other than the defense played great, offense was non-existent for 3 quarters until Giovanni took that hit, and that's whenever the offense decided they wanted to wake up and, maybe we should play, but for some reason they decided that they wanted to wait that long. But my final thought on the game was, yeah, we lost that game, but overall, it was a fun game to watch, even though we did lose. Cincinnati was in it. They played with passion and emotion. And I would have to say, honestly, the crowd itself was probably the loudest I'd ever heard it. I mean, it was absolutely amazing how loud that crowd was for the entire game. I mean, they did not let up every single time the Steelers were on the field, and I'm looking forward to that every single year now.
Yeah, for me, my final thoughts on that game, and one of the biggest takeaways that I had was that the Bengals' offensive line was one of the biggest issues in that game. And I know that's not something that is very popular or hasn't been talked about much in the media or whatever, but given the weather and the fact that McCarron was starting, it was absolutely one of the most important things in the game to make sure that the guy had time to throw the ball. Quite frankly, I think that they will alleviate that problem at right tackle. But I'd also like to see them let loose one of the other players. I think we need a new center. I don't think he's doing the job, and I quite frankly think that it's time for there to be a change there, so that there's more time for our quarterback, no matter who's behind center, to have ample amount of time to actually throw the ball. As far as the game overall, nothing is worse than losing in the final seconds to a field goal that was cut to just, 20-something yards as a result of referees. It blows my mind. It's one of the games that's going to stand out in our minds as Bengals fans for the rest of our lives as being a completely messed up nightmare, quite frankly.
It's cursed all around.
Right. I think that, as far as going into detail on other things that had to do or surrounding those circumstances of that game, for me, it's just, it's a shame that we didn't get the monkey off of our backs with the playoff win. It's a shame that they didn't win on my birthday. and then beyond all that, it's such a heart-wrenching thing to lose to our biggest rival in the playoff game, and knowing that the refs could have caused us to lose that game, and knowing that the Steelers actually played dirtier than we did, yet they still won and got away with it. There's just so many injustices that it's going to stand out as one of the biggest nightmares of a game that I've actually had the opportunity to watch at the stadium, 12 seats from the field.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Scott. Do you think the Bengals-Steelers rivalry has now overtaken the Steelers-Ravens?
I've never really thought that the Steelers-Ravens rivalry even matched what the Cincinnati Bengals-Steelers rivalry always has been. I've never been under the impression that the Steelers and Ravens had a bigger rivalry than we do with them. I've always thought of yellow and black as being the biggest rival against black and orange that there can be in the NFL and ever will be. Unless, of course, we end up meeting San Francisco in the Super Bowl again sometime. Well, real quick, I want to thank you for joining me on the show. Again, this is Scott Meyer, the Real Bengals Fan Podcast with Sammy Stickler, our co-host. He's also one of the authors at realbengalsfans.com, writes some great articles on our website. You'll have to check that out. Again, it's realbengalsfans.com. You can also become a free member and comment on any of the stories, and our authors are very glad to get that feedback and respond quickly back to you. If you have something to say about one of their articles or you have an article idea, I'm sure they'd be glad to hear that too. Do want to do a shout out to our sponsor, the Grueling Truth Radio Network, with the host Mike Goodpaster, who does a Bengals Weekly show and also helps and hosts our Bengals Trivia here on RBF's Facebook group. Don't forget to check out the Facebook group at RBF. Groups at facebook.com, and then our Facebook page, of course. It has 2,000 likes, and we'd like to have you go out there and like it for us. It is Real B Fans, so facebook.com/Real B Fans. I appreciate you listening to us. Appreciate having the opportunity to have the podcast available to you. We will be doing another show here shortly, usually on a weekly basis, so stay tuned for those. Thanks very much for listening. For me, I just want to let out one final thing, and that's a hoo-day.
Hey, Scott, really quick before we sign off here, the one thing I needed to bring up, I know last week I put out a contest for trying to see if we can reach a certain mark for the RBF Facebook page to get a certain amount of likes within a certain amount of time, which that did happen. The winner of that Facebook challenge was Josh Rainey. So, Josh, if you can private message me your address and that Geno Atkins autograph poster, I'll get it into the mail to you immediately. To give you a little bit more information about that poster, is from my tailgating crew, the Bengal Bomb Squad. So, like I said, just Josh Rainey, you've won that. Congratulations on that. Whenever you can, send me that message, and I'll get it out to you. I'll get it out to you properly. Scott, appreciate you having me back on. You know, I know I'm looking forward to what we're going to do for the next one. Other than that, like you say, hoo-day, carry on.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Sammy. I forgot all about that part, and that's a huge, important thing because I know that you're asking people to like the Facebook page resulted in us receiving over 1,000 additional likes just within a 2-week period, which is pretty impressive. So thank you for your help on that and putting that poster up as a way to get people to like our Facebook page more. Of course, being that they're Bengals fans, they're going to enjoy it because they're going to end up with a lot of really good Bengals stuff in their feeds on Facebook. And again, thank you for everything you do for RBF as well.
No problem.
I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week. And hoo-day to everybody.
Hoo-day.